Now, here's Michael Smerconish.
Hey, gang, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. My guest hardly requires introduction. I will recognize her today not only as a former First Lady, United States Senator, and of course, Secretary of State, but now best-selling author of fiction. The book is called State of Terror. The co-authors, Louise Penny, and my guest, Hillary Rodham Clinton. Madam Secretary, thank you so much for being my guest. I thoroughly enjoyed your book.
Oh, thank you so much. I am really delighted to talk with you.
So I need, even though I can see you via Zoom, I need to make sure that I'm not getting pranked, and so that it really is Hillary Clinton. Kindly finish this sentence for me. An oxymoron walked into a bar.
Well, there are so many of those throughout the book, Mike. I mean, really, we are, totally into little, what are they called? Little nuggets of little Easter eggs, as they're called. And, right now, I can't remember that one because my brain is like stopped.
The silence was deafening. And the silence was deafening. A little nerd humor along the way. Look, I love the book. Here's my critique.
Yeah.
It was very fast paced. I feel like it's a combination of Grisham, Patterson, and DeMille, which puts you in very good stead.
Oh, yeah.
I could use a little more cussing, definitely more sex. The violence was what I'd anticipated.
Well, first of all, I DF'd the book because my co-writer, Louise Penny,
would
have been right in your bailiwick, my friend, because she wanted a lot more profanity. And I said, oh, come on. It's not that much. We probably, we're women of a certain age, so we probably would have needed some consulting on the sex stuff. But I'm glad you like the violence anyway.
Madam Secretary, I often begin, and I did this in your case, by starting in the acknowledgments. And I was richly rewarded for doing so. Tell me about Mrs. King's classroom at the Field School in Park Ridge, Illinois, and how that actually plays in. I'm speaking obviously of your relationship with Betsy, but how does that factor into the writing of this book?
Well, it really is an origin story because my best friend from sixth grade, Mrs. King's classroom, was an amazing woman named Betsy Johnson Ebeling, and we became best friends there and stayed friends until she passed away in July of 2019. And she was the person who I started reading Louise Penny mysteries with years ago. And she gave an interview during my 2016 campaign and was asked by the reporter, so what do you and Hillary like to do? And she said a couple of things, but one she said was, we always loved reading and then talking about the books we read and recommending books. You would have loved her. And so the reporter said, well, so what are you reading now? And she could have said anything. And she said Louise Penny, because that happened to be the book that we were reading at the time, the latest in her Gamache series. Fast forward, Louise's publicist from her publisher saw it. They reached out, asked if Betsy wanted to meet Louise when she was promoting her latest book outside of Chicago, where Betsy still lived with her husband, Tom. They met. It was like friendship at first sight. And I was lucky enough then to be introduced to Louise by Betsy. And so we became great friends, but brought together by this extraordinary woman who had a gift for friendship. And in the acknowledgments, that's part of what I point out so people would know, how did I end up writing a book with Louise Penny? And it's really because of my friend from sixth grade.
Well, it's really quite a beautiful story, a sad story, because you lost your friend. Louise lost her husband. You had suffered the election loss. I mean, it's kind of a book born of loss. And then the two of you get together and you take on a responsibility that you'd never had before. You've authored several best-selling works of nonfiction, but this was a first for you.
Right. It was. And I have to tell you, when I was approached by my attorney and agent, Bob Barnett, who you know well, and Louise was approached by hers, my initial response was, I don't think that's something that I can do. I've never written fiction before. And Louise's was, well, we're friends, but I've never collaborated. And thanks to the persuasion of both of those gentlemen and our publishers, they said, well, at least talk about it, see if there's anything there. And once we began talking, we really were off to the races. And so we put our heads together to get an outline, and we finished a 19-page outline shortly before the pandemic. And I really believe that it would have been much, much harder for us to have done this together if it hadn't been for the pandemic. I would have been traveling, she would have been off somewhere. So we mostly worked over FaceTime, over phone, exchanging drafts, doing research. And it turned out to be an absolutely incredible experience because, of course, I could put to work what I had learned and done as Secretary of State. And Louise is a genius at creating characters, and her imagination is just amazing. So it turned out to be a lot of fun.
I have to call BS in terms of it being entirely a work of fiction, though. I mean, okay, the protagonist is Ellen Adams, a Secretary of State. I want my listeners to see if any of this sounds familiar. She is a very hard worker. She is wicked smart. She likes her Chardonnay. That's a good thing. She has a very talented daughter, and she ultimately battles both a Russian and a former United States president who is holed up in a Palm Beach mansion. He is not particularly bright. Does it sound familiar?
Some people have pointed that out. Yeah. There may well be some, comparisons that are apt, although this is, I will be quick to say, fiction. But how could we have lived through,
Right.
the prior 4 years and not have shaken our head in wonderment and despair that, look, I mean, at the crazy things that are happening in our country right now, who would have ever thought any of that was possible? And so
I promise
a lot of rich reality to draw from.
I promise no spoilers, but chapter 34, Secretary Adams' motorcade arrived at the tall gold gates at the front of Eric Dunn's Florida estate. Further along, he was large, immense, in fact. Ellen had met him many times, though only in passing at social events. She'd found him amusing, charming even, though uninterested in others and easily bored when the spotlight shifted to anyone else. Yes, indeed, it sounds familiar.
Yes, it does, doesn't it? Yeah, indeed. And, really trying to hold on to the attention of an entire country and even a world requires you to keep upping the ante, doesn't it? And you have to get more and more outrageous, and you have to be willing to not only perform and entertain, but cross all kinds of boundaries that, undermine our institutions and the rule of law. So the book is also a cautionary tale, which you picked up on. It is a thriller. It's meant to keep you on the edge of your seat. It is kind of unusual in the thriller category. You mentioned some of my favorites, which was quite flattering, but they don't usually have women protagonists. We have two of them, Ellen and her best friend Betsy. So there is a lot that is, I think, familiar to readers, including a coup plot and also the dangers of withdrawing from Afghanistan without a plan. So there are many questions that this book raises that I think readers are finding quite interesting to think about.
So this is a collaboration, and because of the pandemic, Madam Secretary, you've also explained that you had to work remotely with Louise. But take me into your writing room. Where are we? What's going on? Is there music playing? Is there incense burning? I want to understand how Hillary Clinton writes fiction.
Well, the same way I write nonfiction, only it's a lot more interesting, to be clear. I have a little. I'm up on the third floor of my house right now.
Okay.
In Chappaqua, New York, and there's a bigger room, which is the one I'm in, filled with books and papers and all kinds of research and materials for stuff I work on, including writing this book. And then I have another little room, which is my actual office. And, I do listen. I listen to music. Sometimes I listen to news. Sometimes I just need to take a break and I walk around. But I sit there And I am one of the dinosaurs still around that writes by longhand. And when I wrote a book with my daughter called The Book of Gutsy Women that came out in 2019, she said, I knew intellectually that you wrote by longhand, but I had no idea what that would mean. And I think Louise had the same experience. And my only excuse is, well, so does Barack Obama. So I really do write by longhand. And then it's the way I think better. I'm one of these people who crosses things out, makes arrows, turns the page over. It's what I've always done. And for this, which was actually liberating in a way, because I didn't have to dot every I, cross every T, make sure I could back up with a million facts. Remember facts? We used to think about and worry about facts. Yet I didn't have to do that. I had a lot more license than any of the nonfiction I've written.
I've written several nonfiction books, and I've written one novel, and I set out to write another nonfiction book about political polarization. This was a decade ago. And then I decided that maybe I could make it more entertaining if I wrote it in novel style. And I also thought, Madam Secretary, this will be easier. There aren't going to be footnotes. There aren't going to be endnotes. I can have some fun along the way. And I was wrong, because it ended up for me being more arduous. Was writing fiction easier or more difficult for you than nonfiction?
In the beginning, it was more difficult because coming up with a plot, developing characters, trying to stay, within the bounds of something that could have happened, which was important to me. That took a lot of thought. And I was blessed, though, because I had an experienced fiction writer. My friend and collaborator, Louise Penny, is, someone who made the process for me a lot easier. So I can relate to you both, because yes, part of it was harder, kind of getting over some of the humps of figuring out how to do it and what worked and didn't work, DFing the book, which, took a lot of time and effort. But mostly it was a joy because I got to work with somebody who was just a master of her craft.
The book is a bestseller, but for the benefit of those who've not yet had the privilege of reading it, it is very fast paced. As I point out, the protagonist is the Secretary of State, kind of in this unusual situation with the commander in chief, because they were former rivals and continue to be. I'll leave that for the reader. But it moves so quickly that as I was reading it, not only was I trying to keep everything straight, but I was wondering how you writing it made sure that there was continuity. I mean, is there like an area in Louise's house or your house where there are Post-it notes all over the wall just to trying to keep, because there are going to be like fact checkers who are going to go in, even though it's a work of fiction. It's like, does this entirely make sense? Was that a concern?
Oh, huge concern. And you're right, especially for me, because, I get criticized for, waking up in the morning.
Everything.
I had to be really clear, and I did a lot of the research, and I reached out to people in certain areas where I needed some extra expertise. So you're right. I had Post-it notes, I had outlines, I had, lists, and even with all of the work and the effort, we also had a very thorough edit, and that turned out to be also helpful, because it is like turning your baby over to somebody and then they say, hey, you never noticed this, the baby has this problem or this issue. Well, we turned over the manuscript and then held our breath. So I was really conscious of how I couldn't afford to make any mistake about anything that is in the real world. So I did work really hard on that. And one of the great compliments I got is that, a reader in Pakistan just, reached out through my publisher and basically said, I can't believe how right they got so much of everything from the names and the language and, the food that's served and the way that, people behave and how they interact. So I've gotten a lot of good positive reinforcement. Haven't heard from anybody in Iran, so I don't know if they know that we actually in the book go to Tehran, but I'm waiting to see.
This is not a one-off, right? You're into this, you're successful in this, you're having fun.
I don't know. I mean, it was really fun. And talking to you, because I know how much you love books and you're right.
I do.
It's so much fun. But Boy, it was a big undertaking. And like I said, it was more possible because of the pandemic. Now I'm kind of back into, doing a lot of other things, but we've certainly been asked that. And maybe when we catch our breath, we'll figure out if it's possible to, build on what we just did.
Finally, the rivalry under your roof, because President Clinton has had great success with James Patterson. I mean, the two of you, do you compare relative New York Times positions and so forth?
Well, we did. And Jim Patterson gave the book, and I literally held my breath when I heard that the publishers had sent him a book, because he and his wonderful wife, Sue, have become real friends of ours. And he actually liked it, and that was huge, and gave us an amazing blurb for it. But their first book, The President is Missing, blew the top off sales, and boy, I'm not sure anybody is going to reach that level. But we have a friendly competition.
If I'm offered an invitation to interview Secretary Hillary Clinton, the answer, of course, is yes. And I made that commitment without reading the book. The book is great. I mean, the book is really, really terrific. And for people who enjoy the sort of things that interest me, who listen to a program like this, they will be totally into it too, because it is a political thriller. At its core, that's it. And it's very contemporary. And you will laugh along the way at the way in which Secretary Clinton and Louise Penny work in references to contemporary politics and politicians. So anyway, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I thoroughly enjoyed what you wrote.
Oh, thank you. That means the world. And yeah, I know talking about state of terror in the holiday season may seem like an oxymoron, but it's a good read. It takes you out of where we all are right now. And have a happy and healthy holiday season, Michael.
And to you. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it very much.